Good evening, everybody. I'm Shani. I'm one of the counsellors at Changes Rehab Centre. I just wanted to comment on 2 weeks ago. This will be the second part of the disease of addiction that I covered 2 weeks ago. We did look at addiction in the brain, and tonight our main focus will be addiction and how it pertains to the liver. So if you were here 2 weeks ago, you'll remember me saying that the disease of addiction that affects the brain is only half of the problem. And it explains the insane decision-making that you see in your loved ones. However, it doesn't explain the second half of why they don't stop. So why don't they quit while they're ahead? If they can see the destruction around them, they can see the consequences, they go to rehab. Sometimes they have moments of sobriety, lengthy periods of sobriety, 6 months, 8 months. Why does it kick back in? And why do we return if we've seen the consequences of our actions, if we've seen the damage it's done? Why then do we return? So I'm hoping to cover that tonight. I am going to do a bit of an overview if you weren't here 2 weeks ago. And hopefully we'll have enough time at the end for questions. I realized I didn't leave much time the last time, so let's see if we can get through it. Okay, just the next slide, please, Kate. All right. So with the disease of addiction, there was always this debate in addiction between, is addiction a choice or is it really a disease? And what I covered 2 weeks ago was that the best way to understand it is the disease of choice. The choice model doesn't really help. It doesn't really take into account the brain and its capacity for choice. So that's where the choice model fails in comparison to why it is a disease, because it doesn't take in the biology necessary to make choice. So addiction is a disease of choice. It's a disease that affects the choice-making part of the mind, if I can put it that way. I just want to put this down. It is a disorder. It is a disorder of the very parts of the brain we need to make proper decisions. The behaviors we see are in fact symptoms of a disease. Oh, 1 second. Sorry, 1 second. Hey. My apologies. My dogs have lost their mind. Okay. The behaviors we see, in fact, are symptoms of a disease. So addiction is a disease that affects the reward circuit of the brain. In order to understand the addict's fixation and obsession with using and drinking, despite negative consequences, even after periods of sobriety, we needed to fully understand how substances alter the brain and affect rational decision-making. So just the next slide, please. So when we look at the disease of addiction and why we call it a disease, we had to make sure first that the elements of what makes addiction a disease fits the disease model. And this is a model that all doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists use to diagnose, basically. And it has to fit these three criteria. So there needs to be an organ where there is a defect, and this defect will have a various range of symptoms. So 2 weeks ago, we were discussing what is the organ, one of the organs, that gets affected. And that organ, primarily in addiction, is the midbrain, which is the back part of the brain. It's right at the bottom. And this is the part where the disease of addiction starts. And in this part of the brain, there is a defect. And this defect is the stress-induced pleasure dysfunction. So in layman's terms, with addicts and alcoholics, it is the pleasure system, it's the network, and there are various levels of processing that goes from the midbrain all the way through to the frontal cortex of the brain. The frontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, for morals, for rational judgments. And if this part of the brain is affected, you will see insane behavior come out. So stealing, buying alcohol instead of putting groceries on the table. You know, things that families would consider to be logical decisions. If it's hurting you, why don't you stop? That's logical. But if the part of the brain necessary for rational decision making is affected, that's when we see dysfunctional behavior come out. So we know over the years, since I think it was 1930s, that many experiments have been done, many brain scans have been done, and we can now prove that the origin of the disease of addiction starts in the midbrain. And as it works up the pleasure system, which I'm going to go through now, all the way to the frontal cortex, it's almost like a Russian doll. You know those dolls you put inside of each other? So if one little doll is affected, it's going to affect the rest of them all the way up until the frontal cortex. And research has shown that this is possible in addicts and alcoholics, and this is where it started to originate from. So the fact that there's a defect in the midbrain and the symptoms that come out by the time it's gone through the entire pleasure circuit are loss of control, craving, persistent use, and insane behavior, dysfunctional behavior. Those are symptoms. Like I said, the behaviors that you are seeing in your loved ones are symptoms of a disease. The behavior isn't the problem. You know, we can arrest the behavior by all means, but that does not uproot the origins of the problem. So like I was saying 2 weeks ago, if you've got pneumonia, for example, and say your symptoms are, I'm just going to make them up, but like a runny nose or a sore ear and a sore throat, yes, I can give you a lozenge. We can use some nose spray, and we can put some Vicks in your ear. That's wonderful, but that does not solve the problem, because that's just addressing symptoms. So we have to address the defect. So if we address the defect, because obviously we can't address the organ unless we're going to have a brain transplant, we can't change the organ. So if we change the defect, you'll stop seeing the symptoms. Same in addiction. If we can address the pleasure dysfunction, you will stop seeing those behaviors come out on the other side. So we have to address the defects of character, not necessarily the behavioral symptoms. Just the next one, please, Kate. So when the brain, this is to explain, I'm going to make a quick summary of how it actually works in the brain. When the brain creates a pleasurable experience, how does it do that? So what it does is it brings several levels of processing together into one experience. It brings smells, rewards, tastes, places, associated memories, and even emotions together into one single sensation. So if you had to have let's say, hug in a mug, and the first time you ever had hug in a mug was on Valentine's Day, and it was the time that your fiance proposed to you. Now, every single time you drink hug in a mug, it's going to bring the smell, the experience, the taste, the place you were at when you had it, your fiance, how you felt with your fiance. And it's going to, every time you drink it, your brain's going to go, oh my gosh, extremely pleasurable, because it is associated with a pleasurable experience. And that's how the brain locks in a pleasurable, happy moment or feeling. So this begins in the midbrain, like I said, at the bottom, right in the middle. And this neural pathway goes from the bottom all the way to the top, to the frontal cortex. Now, there are many levels of this processing, which you can't see on an individual level, but there are various levels. In addiction, unfortunately, something goes wrong at each level of processing. This is why we call it the disease of distorted perception. So if we, like I said, if something goes wrong at the primary stage, by the time it works all the way through, it's going to come out distorted. So often I say to the clients, they say, you know, like, what is insanity versus sanity? And for them, it makes sense that if, say, a loved one opens a bottle of shooters and pours out a shooter glass and then puts the bottle back in the fridge, to them, that just boggles their mind. It just doesn't make sense. Why aren't you drinking the whole bottle? You know, it's completely distorted, whereas people who don't suffer from this go, I don't need to drink the whole bottle, it's Tuesday. I'm just going to have a shooter. It's unnecessary to drink a whole bottle, that's abnormal. So it's almost back to front. So what our loved ones see versus what the client experiences is almost back to front. It almost has a negative feedback loop in the brain. So these levels of processing that are affected, primarily the first point of cause, and obviously we're going to look at causation now, what causes this. The primary factor is genetics. So there is a hereditary factor when it comes to addiction and alcoholism. If you look back in your family tree, and if our loved ones look back in their family tree, you probably find that there's a 40 to 60% chance that there's someone in your family that has some sort of addiction, alcoholism, or dependence on something outside of themselves, whether it be work, shopping, money, sex, gambling, something outside of themselves. Yes, there is a genetic vulnerability and a predisposition to have this disease. Some people don't have that predisposition. There's about a 30% range of people who don't. And these people that do get addicted is not necessarily from a genetic point of view, but what happens is the two other causes are trauma and environmental factors. So trauma and environmental factors. So for example, growing up in an environment or going to a school where there's a lot of exposure to drugs as a coping strategy, or exposure to alcohol as a coping strategy, that environment and trauma, believe it or not, is powerful enough to actually alter genetics. So if you are resilient genetically, the chances are unlikely, but if you're not genetically resilient, have the predisposition and the vulnerability, that put together has the power to change the genetic code. And if we're there right in genes, you can see how that can start to affect the rest of the system. So that will affect the reward system, which is primarily associated with a hormone called dopamine. Dopamine is not just your happy hormone, it's known as the happy hormone, the hormone that allows you to experience pleasure and happiness. But it's more important because dopamine is very important for helping you to almost differentiate between something that is better than expected. So if you had a gumball machine, for example, and you put a coin in and 2 gumballs came out, your brain will go, oh my gosh, that was better than expected, because it only expected 1. And when 2 came out, your brain would release dopamine going, my goodness, that was better than I expected. So that's what dopamine is for, is to remember better than expected and to differentiate moments and experiences and pleasurable experiences that are better than others. That will then, if that part of the brain is affected, it will affect the memory part of the brain. The hormone associated with memory is glutamate, and that hormone specifically is necessarily for remembering that this was a pleasurable experience. And then that affects the stress relief system. So when the body and your loved one is under stress, then the brain, or anyone under stress rather, it will go back to the memory part to try and figure out when last did I feel happy, because they're under stress. It will go back into memory to find the most pleasurable experience, latch onto that. And then that will be, okay, so if that's where you found happy the last time, it will affect the choice, and the choice part of the brain will say, go get it. So that in layman's terms is how it affects. So I'm just going to show you a graph on the next slide. So how it works when it comes to addiction and alcoholism. When I'm going to explain those 5 things. So if you've got a genetic vulnerability, what happens is we're over here at the bottom. I hope you can see my mouse. So at the bottom of A, when someone takes a drink or takes a drug, the dopamine released when it comes to that is unnatural. Okay, we are not designed to take in toxins. These on a human level. Okay, so they release 1.1 thousand nanograms of dopamine with 1 line or 1 drink. Now, on average, if you want to look at it, just to get up, let's just say food releases about 18 nanograms of dopamine. So you can imagine 1,100 and 18 nanograms is just such a massive jump. So if you can see my mouse, I hope you can. From here, they take a drink, they take a drug, and it releases 1,100 nanograms of dopamine. It is a massive spike in the system. And that will tell the body and the brain that, oh my gosh, that was better than I expected. That will then affect the memory system. So now the brain will release glutamate. And up it comes, this is the yellow line. And the glutamate will lock that memory into place. It will tell the brain, this is what to remember. It will lock it into the brain to that point. The next time they will drink, but it won't really feel the same way because here is what they remember. So what they do is they take, let's say, 2 drinks and 3 shooters because we're trying to chase that feeling, which is what they remember as happy. And because they've taken more, it's better than expected. So glutamate, like a little soldier, comes and follows. And as it gets there, it goes, oh my gosh, this is amazing, and locks it into the brain as a new memory. Now, this continues over time. You know, the more they drink, the more they use, the more the memory is stored into the brain. This blue line over here is about the natural degree of dopamine release. So you can see the massive jump. So how this affects the stress system, because the body is not designed for this at all. It releases something called CRF. CRF is a hormone that maintains homeostasis in the brain. Now, if this is the new level of happy, this body goes under sincere stress. And what it does is it raises the bar all the way to the top. And this becomes the new level of happy in the brain, which is completely abnormal, which means that your loved ones having food, spending time with their kids, maintaining a job, engaging in normal activities that make one happy. This does not compare. It comes nowhere near this part of the brain. So if they're here, they're living in a constant state of dissatisfaction, which appears in your loved ones as anxiety and depression, not to minimize that they might have the mental illness, but the feeling is depression and the feeling is anxiety the whole time. And if this is how they constantly feel, the brain's going to go, when last was I happy? And it will go back to this level, and it will seek it out, send it to the choice part of the brain, and ask them to go get this, because their brain will tell them without this, they will consistently be unhappy. And for human survival, we need to be happy. So technically, their brain tells them, if they don't go get drugs and alcohol now, you will die. And it basically tricks them. So that's in summary how addiction affects the brain. But like I said, this is only half of the problem. So let's get into the second half of what the other half of the problem is. If we could just have the next slide, please, Kate. So not only do addicts and alcoholics have a defect in their brain, the midbrain, they too have another defect that affects the liver. This one isn't as commonly known. It was established in the 1930s when AA came across it. Over time, again, research has been done. And what they've seen is that in addicts and alcoholics, there is also a defect of acetone secretion, the hormone that breaks down acetone, should I say, the enzymes necessary to break down acetone. Those enzymes, there's a defect in that system, in the metabolism system. That affects the liver. The symptoms that you will see are physical craving and persistent use despite negative consequences. So again, if it can fit these 3 criteria, we definitely can say that they have a disease. So this is the second part. So yes, having a disease helps understand why the addict cannot stay abstinent, but it does not explain why they still choose to drink and use despite negative consequences. So why is that? And that all comes down to the defect in the liver. Next slide, please, Kate. So addicts and alcoholics, the thing that separates them from normal people is something we call the phenomenon of craving. So it is impossible. It is impossible to crave without putting the drink or substance in the system. So you'll often hear our clients, our loved ones, they will hear that, I'm just craving a drink. I'm just craving a drink. And that is physically impossible. Once the substance in the drink is out of the body, it is no longer a craving. That is an obsession, and that is referring to the mind. We are now referring to the body, okay, the disease of the body. Craving is only possible if they put it in their system. So in the 1930s, when the disease of addiction emerged, doctors knew little about metabolism. Today, we know that if you put anything in your system, like bread, that the mind and body recognizes what that is, and certain organs of the body begin to produce enzymes that attack that food and begin to break it down and separate it into usable and non-usable parts. What the body can use, such as the proteins and the amino acids and vitamins, the body will retain. And what it cannot use, it will dissipate through the urinary and intestinal tract. Today we call this metabolism. Hence why when people drink, they tend to go to the loo a lot. So that just puts it into perspective. When the mind and body registers alcohol, it starts the enzyme production, releasing enzymes to break it down into acetaldehyde, then acetic acid, and then to acetone. So what's important here is that in the final stages, acetone becomes a simple carbohydrate, and that gets dispensed, so water through the urinary tract, sugar for energy, carbon dioxide through the lungs. What's very important about this is that in normal social drinkers, this takes the liver about approximately 100 milliliters per hour to metabolize through the system. So to break it down from start to finish, to break it into usable, non-usable, it takes roughly about 100 milliliters per hour to go through the whole system and to obviously dissipate through the urinary tract. Which means that if a normal social drinker, if they don't drink more than 100 milliliters per hour, they can't get drunk. Their body metabolizes it and burns it up and uses it at that rate. Obviously, if you drink more than that, that's when we get intoxicated. So this is in a normal person, not in an alcoholic. Okay, just the next slide, please. However, there's a big difference with alcoholics. So when alcoholics put alcohol in their bodies, the same thing happens, but it appears in alcoholics' bodies, the enzymes necessary to complete the metabolism of breaking it from acetone to a simple carbohydrate are not there in the same qualities and quantities as they are in the bodies of normal drinkers. They, in fact, have 3 times less the amount of enzymes necessary for acetone breakdown. So why is this so important? Alcohol, therefore, stays in the body for a longer period of time as acetone. It is proven today that acetone ingested into the human system that remains there for a depreciable period of time will produce an actual physical craving more of the same. Just the next slide, please. Okay, so let's put this into context, because I know that's a bit of a mouthful. Okay, so what this means is that in alcoholics' bodies, acetone stays there long enough for the craving to develop, and that demands a second drink. So just think about it. You've got most of the acetone of the first drink. Now you put that in from the second drink. The acetone levels go up, and if the acetone is what causes the craving, then craving becomes harder with the second drink. Now you put in the third drink. You've got most of the acetone from the first drink and the second drink, and now the acetone of the third, and the craving goes up, and that demands a fourth drink. So that's why once they start, they can't stop. Okay, once the alcohol goes in, that rationality around, oh, I've got work tomorrow, I'm feeling a bit tipsy, maybe I should drink a bit of water and get home safely, doesn't occur, because the body is craving another one, craving it for survival. So this is just the body that we're not even talking about the mind. It's the body craving it, needing it. And that cycle continues. So by the time the acetone has built up and built up and built up, and it's staying in the body longer and longer, it then demands more and more and more. By now, they are completely intoxicated. indispensable to any rhyme or reason. They're blacking out, they're falling all over the show. They have no memory. If you try to intervene, they get aggressive or stubborn or act in illogical ways to protect using or drinking. To families and friends, this seems insane. They would often say, babe, like, haven't you had enough? Don't you think you should slow down? You know, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Why are you on your fifth drink? Physically, though, it would make sense. That is why we say in AA and in this program, 1 was too many and 1,000 is never enough. They are completely powerless over that. The more they drink, the higher the craving, the higher the craving, the more they drink. So that's how it affects the liver. Just the next slide, please, Kate. All right. Now, if this didn't get any worse, if this was the length and breadth of the problem, it might seem like that was enough. An alcoholic could probably learn to live with this situation. But not only do they have an illness, they have a progressive illness. And what this means. So not only today we know that as they drink, the more they drink, the longer they drink, the more tissue they destroy. Alcohol is a destroyer of human tissue. And the more tissue we destroy, it seems as though that it acts upon 2 organs of the body first. So that would be the liver and the pancreas. Today, we know that the organs of the body responsible to produce the enzymes necessary to break down and metabolize alcohol are the liver and the pancreas. And as we drink and as we damage them, the enzyme production becomes less and less. Remember, they've already got 3 times less the enzymes necessary to break down. So the damage caused by drinking alcohol is consistently breaking down the 2 organs necessary to produce those enzymes. So it's getting even worse. And as they drink, the craving becomes harder and harder, with the compulsion and result of drinking becoming worse and worse. We also know that the body begins to shut down the production of everything as we get older. So if I should take a drink after, like, say, 4 years of sobriety, I wouldn't start where I left off 4 years ago. The craving would be harder, the drinking would be harder, and the result of trouble would just be worse due to the aging factor. So the 2 factors that make this even worse, on top of the fact that their liver does not produce the correct amount of enzymes necessary to break down acetone, alcohol damages the body, less acetone, less enzymes can be produced. And we get older. So not only is the liver failing now, and we're getting older, we've gone from 3 times less to, in a matter of time, 10 times less. And it doesn't get better. Because we're getting older, it doesn't mean that if I stop now, that 6 years from now, I'll be able to drink again, because the damage has already been done. The disease is already there. So the disease is there, the damage has been done. And 6 years older, there's no way I would have more enzyme production than anything else. So that are 2 other factors that affect this. Just the next slide, please. Okay, so I just saw a message pop up in the chat, and yes, it does pertain to both. It's not just necessarily alcohol, but drugs as well. So your liver and your pancreas break down toxins. So drugs are still a toxin. So the same thing does happen. To put it in layman's terms, the alcoholic and the addict has 2 problems. We call it the allergy of the body and the obsession of the mind. So technically, you have a body that can't break it down. So if you want to look at it, it's almost like having an allergy to alcohol and drugs, because the body reacts in an odd way. It doesn't metabolize it. It tells the brain more. On top of that, they have a mind that has remembered that this is the only point of happiness for me. So it's mind and body fighting with each other. So we call it the disease, the obsession of the mind and the allergy of the body. So if we look at the first column, just the first column, the first problem that they have is that they have a body, they have a they have a defect in the liver, which affects acetone secretion. We know if acetone stays in the body too long, it creates the phenomenon of craving, which we've just discussed. There are two more factors, damage to the body and aging, which affects the phenomenon of craving, which damages the liver, which only makes it worse. And that creates the compulsive desire to drink or use despite negative consequences. No rhyme or no reason will get in the way of that. So once they put it in their bodies, they can't stop. Once they start, they can't stop. So the solution that we have found, and the only solution that we have found to deal with just the body, is complete abstinence. We cannot afford to put mood or mind-altering substances into the body. It will kick the craving into place. So we have to keep the substances out of the body. Now, if this was the solution to all things, then here we are, we're done. But I'm sure you guys have seen that it's not as simple as that there's something else at play here. So the problem comes when they stop, not when they start. So once they start, stop. Now they come to treatment and we try our best, we teach them all of this, and a lot of our clients believe if I just stop drinking and using, all my problems would go away. No, definitely not. That's probably the easiest part of rehabilitation. So once they stop, it precipitates the brain disease. So the first part I spoke about, the entire disease of the brain, how it affects those 5 parts, genes, reward, memory, stress, and choice. Once they stop, that is when the obsession of the mind kicks in. So why does that happen? Well, you can imagine that once they stop drinking and using and they have to deal with life on life's terms, they become restless, they become irritable, they become discontent. Normal life's dopamine, remember, does not factor. It does not make them feel happy. So normal daily routines, eating food, having sex, playing with their kids, all of those normal levels of happy do not compare because their memory of happy is way too high. So once they stop, they're in distress, emotionally in distress. And what happens is they basically say, how I feel is more important than anything else. It almost overrides anything else. Their brain will say, for survival purposes, I'm going to go back to that place where it tells me, okay, when last was I happy? It's going to remember a false, fraudulent memory of a dopamine release that was unnatural. They're going to start obsessing and daydreaming and thinking of the good old days, and perhaps I don't have a problem. That's what we see as denial. And once that kicks in, they become obsessed with ways to relieve the feelings that come from trying to stop, because it's exceptionally uncomfortable. So what happens is once they stop, they can't stay stopped. And there is no cure for this other than the 12-step program. The solution for the body, keep it out of the body. The solution for the mind, we need to keep reminding ourselves that half the things going through the mind are fraudulent. So if I can put it as an example, as an allergy, like to peanuts. Let's say, for example, you have an allergy to peanuts. When you take the peanut, your throat swells up, your eyes start to water, you can't breathe, you're in distress. So a doctor tells you that if you eat a peanut, you are going to die. So don't eat peanuts, okay? You react terribly to them. Now, that would be fine if you didn't have a mind that told you that if you don't eat the peanut, you will die. Without the peanut, you will never be happy. So what they do is they eat the peanut, it clicks in the craving tells them, oh my gosh, I need more and more and more. But the body is allergic to peanuts, so the swelling gets worse and worse and worse. But the mind says, without the peanut, you're going to die. And the cycle just continues. It's almost as if they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. And that place is the most trapping, it's a horrible place. You have a body a mind that says yes, but a body that says no. You have a mind that says it will be okay, but you have a body that is failing you. Your kidney could be failing, your liver could be failing, but your brain is still saying, go for it, go for it, go for it, go for it. And that is addiction. The combination of both is just, it's fatal. Unfortunately, it's fatal. The three alternatives where if there's no interventional treatment, the reality is either end up in jail for the symptoms that come with this illness, so the theft, the thieving, the criminal activity, the insane behavior, drunk driving, that high-risk behavior with needles, with sexual pursuits, promiscuous behavior, all of that kind of stuff. We're either going to end up in jail, in institutions, or death. And those three are inevitable if there is no intervention or treatment. Just the next slide, please, Kate. I know that might sound a bit hopeless, so I thought I'd just put this slide in there just in case. So recovery is possible. In order to arrest the allergy, the liver, the compulsion for more, we advocate for abstinence. And then, as this is when the obsession of the mind begins, this is why we advocate for the 12-step program, because there is no physical solution. We cannot change the body, and we cannot change the mind. We can't change the organs, but we can address the defects. The only way to address the defect and the allergy of the liver and the disease of the liver is do not put the substance in the body. But when that happens, life happens. They become unhappy, remember what makes them happy, and then their brain says, go get that only thing that makes you happy or you will die. I know it sounds very dark, but that is legitimately what happens. And then the mind kicks in. Now, in order to keep the mind in place to address the disease of the brain, the 12-step program manages this. So what the 12-step program does, it helps with the obsession to return to using as their only memory of dopamine. The 12-step program helps them access new neural pathways to avoid dopamine releases, avoiding associations with using. It helps them with new coping mechanisms to diminish the stress and the anxiety and all the irritable, restless, and discontent feelings, emotional regulation, and helps bring them back into reality on a daily basis. It does this by allowing them to access a sponsor, meetings, their step work, service, and having a higher power. Those 5 things are crucial. If your loved ones leave here clean and sober and they do not engage with a 12-step program, it is just a matter of time before their mind wipes them out completely. Okay, they're not more powerful than that memory. It's going to take about 18 months for them to start forming new neural pathways, to avoid things that create those dopamine spikes. And only after about 18 months will they start to really enjoy things like food and sex and going to the movies and doing very normal, happy things. So in the 12-step program, the first step, and this is why it's so important, the first step, we ask our clients to admit 2 things. 1, that they are powerless, and 2, that their lives have become unmanageable. And that is what this is referring to. 1, you are powerless. There isn't a reality where the craving will not kick in if you put it in your system. There is no stopping you. Once it's in, it's in. Once they start, they can't stop. You are powerless. You have an allergy. You react oddly when it's in your system. You can't put it in your body. There isn't a reality where your liver isn't going to fail you. There isn't a reality where the pancreas is not going to fail. There isn't a reality where we're going to affect the brain's biology by putting toxins in it. They're not more powerful than that. That's what happens when we put poison in our body. That's 101. To keep them on the logical, rational track, to stop that from going from the midbrain to the frontal cortex, at all of those levels of processing, there are 5 steps in the 12-step program that intervene very smartly at each level of processing. The combination of both is how recovery is achieved. And that's basically both problems and the solutions. Just the next slide, please, Kate. I don't know how much time we have, but I'm going to just open it up for any questions, and I will try my best to answer. Yeah, thank you for letting me present. I hope that made a bit more sense.
Okay, Shani, there's a question which I think is also for another lecture, but it's, what is the 12-step program? Are you taking us through the 12-step program?
Currently, during the slide, no. I'm just referring to how the 12-step program relates to recovery, why we advocate for the 12-step program. The 12-step program is not the only solution. Like I say, abstinence is the primary factor that we need to consider. But in order for our loved ones to stay abstinent, they need to keep their mind in reality. They need someone to consistently remind them every single day. They need to surrender their thinking and their behavior over to someone in recovery who has walked this road before, who knows how to handle the insanity that comes with their behavior. And that's how the 12-step program works. It's just the 12-step program addresses the obsession of the mind, and abstinence addresses the allergy of the body. And there has to be a combination of both.
We will definitely be doing a presentation in the near future on the 12 steps. So please join every week.
If anybody's got questions, just raise your hand or take your mute off, or send a question through.
Hi, I'm Una Peterse, and I absolutely love the content covered today. I just want to know, I think we spoke about it, is that what are the 12 steps, and how can we as parents of our loved ones support, you know, our loved ones going through that 12 steps?
And I think that's a very vital question, and there's a few elements to that. So like I said, it takes about 18 months, keeping it out the system. So the first thing in terms of support is that research shows that the longer addicts and alcoholics are in a program or tethered to the 12-step program or tethered to treatment, the higher their chances of succeeding. So the first thing is to try and help them stay tethered, whether it be extended treatment, a halfway house, a sober living environment, doing a 90-90, which are 90 meetings in 90 days. So the moment they leave the treatment center, they must do a meeting every day for the next 90 days to keep them tethered, talking to their sponsor every day for at least the first 30 days. And I think it's just important to know that this is what is expected of them, because if family members don't know, they're not going to know that they're not going to meetings. They're not going to know that they're not speaking to their sponsor. And those are warning signs. If they're not engaging in a 12-step program, the 5 pillars that I've mentioned, which is service, going to meetings, speaking to their sponsor, doing step work, and engaging in a spiritual way of life, if they're failing to do those things and they're not doing it on a regular basis, I guarantee you will start seeing the behaviors you know all too well. Because they're going to be relying on old behaviors to seek that dopamine release again. So it's to keep them accountable. I mean, their recovery is their responsibility, but as a family member, there's no shame in saying, when last did you go to a meeting? When last did you speak to your sponsor? I haven't seen you do step work. I really haven't. When last did you call your friends in recovery? To ask those questions, to remind them. Again, we're trying to remind them, keep them in reality, stay where your feet are, and get them back to where they're supposed to be. So keeping them tethered as long as possible to some sort of recovery program, and monitoring, I would say monitoring that they're doing the 12 steps, and then most importantly, cross addiction. So yes, your loved one might be with us for alcohol. Your loved one might be with us for, let's say, cocaine. They are not to be touching mood and mind altering substances. So codeine, no. Benzos, no. Opioids, no. Cough mixture, no. You know, anything that has an addictive quantity inside. And there's so many opioids, you know, cross-addicting. Yeah, I had a problem with alcohol, but I can smoke weed. Definitely not. It will have the same impact on the phenomenon of craving. They have to abstain from all mood and mind altering substances unless prescribed by a psychiatrist and taken according to script, because that's monitored by the psychiatrist.
Yeah, sorry, Shani, we've got a couple of questions. Tia, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, I want to tell people how I see the 12 steps, because everybody talks about it, and for a long time I had no clue what it is. So there is different 12-step programs. There's one for narcotics and one for alcohol and one for eating and one for recovery as a parent and one for, so there's different ones. So you can actually get a 12-step book that helps you recover because from your loved one's addiction and the chaos in your life. And the 12 steps is literally 12 steps that doesn't take 12 days. It can take a year or 2 years. So the steps are written in the books, but it's more important. You need the support. So you need to come to a meeting like this and get the support, because you'll learn more if there's a sponsor, if there's somebody that helps you. So every time we get the question, what is the 12 steps? I don't think it's actually about what is the actual 12 steps, you know, step 1, step 2. It's more like not all of us knows exactly what it is. And it took me a long time to figure that out.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know
Tia.
who was speaking now. I'm also a mom new to all of this, and all of this is really oh my gosh, it's just so dramatic to me. But I also don't know the 12 steps, and I would want to do, and you know, to know those and to support my son. And I'm so totally with the last speaker on this call in understanding what are those 12 steps, and is there something that you can share with us that can educate us so that we can better support our children or our loved ones that are going through this?
And I think in response to that, we will be doing a presentation next week, and we will incorporate that for the 12 steps, seeing there are new people here. So do join next week. We will do the 12 steps. But in addition to that, if you speak to your counselor, they will be able to give you some literature in the time being, so you can start to digest a bit of what that is about and get a feeling for it, so that when we address it in the presentation form, you can raise questions and inquire about it from that perspective. But given that it is quite a lengthy process, it would probably take a whole presentation to do. Okay.
Kate. If in the meantime, we're very blessed to have the internet. So research, there's lots and lots of information around the 12 steps. I recommend the Melody Beattie approach to recovery. She's got the addict alcoholic approach, but she's also got the family and the codependent approach. She's got her own Facebook websites. You can purchase her books. And then if you can handle his choice of words, Russell Brand has an incredible understanding of the 12 steps, but he swears like a trooper. And if you can put that aside, his books are phenomenal in understanding the 12 steps. Please also join
So what I would
page.
appreciate it as a mom having to learn all of this, if you could maybe just make those links available, maybe on the mail, like today where you reminded us of this session. Can you maybe make links available for us to just, you know, go in and just get more aware and learn about all of this kind of stuff? Because I think I speak for every parent who has got a child that is currently going through all of this is that we want to do everything that we can to help them.
Mm. Okay,
Perfect.
Una,
We
if
will,
I
we will
may,
do that.
I've put
Yeah.
it in the chat. So I've written it in the chat. So anybody who would like to know the names, it's in the chat. A way to look at this, when you first hear about the new Ford that's come out on the market, and somebody you know has a Ford, all of a sudden you start looking and all you see is that Ford. Addiction is very similar. When we're living with it, we don't know what to do. And when they enter into treatment for the first time and we hear all this information, we become overwhelmed and quite scared because how am I going to apply this to my life? And the one thing, and somebody asked earlier on the group, how do we help your loved ones? And one of the most important lessons we learn and teach them is how to live one day at a time and how to take one issue at a time, one crisis at a time, one hour at a time, one insight at a time, because sadly we are in this for life. We're not just in this for a year or 18 months. That's how long it takes him to stabilize. But we live, if you love an addict or you're an addict yourself, we will live with this for the rest of our lives. The answer is how to do it in a manageable way. There is 12 steps for families called Naranon, CODA, Al-Anon. There's Tough Love family support groups. So there's a lot, even with COVID, it's allowing us to do this regularly on Zoom. There's other meetings that happen almost every night around the world. You can join meetings in America, England, Yugoslavia, for addicts in recovery or for families in recovery. So my suggestion is take it slowly, learn something new every day, read, talk about it, join a support group. I find that my family weren't very helpful, so they weren't my support group. I had to go join a support group of men and women who were living the same way I had lived. I found that incredibly helpful, but slow down. It takes a long time.
Okay. There's some other questions, Shani, for you perhaps. From Gerard. So cravings can be cured by medicine and self-control, but mind must be fixed with only self-control and 12-step program.
I think that's just a bit of a misunderstanding. Like, we can't cure the allergy of the body with medicine. There is no cure. There is no cure at all. We're just born that way. There is, addicts and alcoholics are 3 times less the enzymes necessary. That is not something medication can fix. That is not something, a liver transplant, we can go through the whole realm, but it doesn't change the fact that the liver and the brain are connected. The only solution that there is to keep it out of the body. Do not put it in the body. So that's abstinence. And that, yeah, I mean, there's a level of self-control that comes with that. It's just avoid people, places, and things associated with it. So there are various ways to avoid alcohol and so forth. Because they cannot crave. You can't crave unless you got it in the body. So after, I think there was another question there somewhere saying that what happens over a substantial period of time, say 2 years in recovery, how does that explain craving? That's not craving. That's obsession. That's the illness of the mind has kicked in. You can only crave, because craving is referring to the body, like the liver. It's not referring to the mind and the insanity that comes with the mind. So over a period of time, by all means, you might have been 2 years without putting substances in your body, and we call it a dry drunk. They don't change behavior. They're still seeking things that release dopamine. So you might find for the past 2 years, they've been having lots of sex, they've been doing a lot of exercise, they've been gambling, they've been playing these, I don't know, Candy Crush obsessively on the phone. You know, they find ways and means to try and achieve that dopamine. They tell themselves, as long as I'm not drinking and drugging, I can get away and do whatever I want. That is not recovery. That is dry drunk. So all they're doing is keeping it out their system, which is great, but they need to change because they're still sending the message to the brain, sending it to the brain and spiking dopamine. We're avoiding dopamine release spikes. We can't do that. So after 2 years, there's the sense of hopelessness that develops if they don't change. They get irritable, they get restless, something's missing. They're a bit tired of going to like family functions, and they can't drink, and then the self-pity kicks in, and then the sadness kicks in, and then that fear of missing out, and all those feelings. Normal people have coping strategies for that. They turn to family, friends, food, so forth. Addicts and alcoholics, remember, have saved the memory in their brain that if I feel like that, there's only one place and one place to go. And what they do after 2 years, they say, oh, it's been 2 years. I'm sure I can handle a drink. I'm sure I'll be fine. And they have a drink and it kicks in the craving. Again, the liver's as hurt as it was when they stopped. So the craving is worse, which demands more than they originally started. And that's, unfortunately, that's what happens to our loved ones or our clients when they leave and they relapse. A lot of them don't make it because they don't go in, they're using the same quantities that they were when they came in, and the body just shuts down. So I know it sounds very bleak and there's a lot of despair there, but I can guarantee you there are nearly 165 million people around the world who have recovered, completely recovered, no mood and mind altering substances. So that's what normally happens. It's not craving, and it's not a matter of self-control. If it was a matter of self-control, we wouldn't be here. They would just say, I'm done. I don't want to do it. Look how I've hurt my wife. It's terrible. I don't want to do that anymore. And they don't. That's not the case. They can tell themselves that 1,000 times. They're not more powerful than that memory that has been stored. I hope that answers the question if I didn't leave anything out there.
Shani, there's a question from Catherine. Catherine, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if somebody has been using marijuana and marijuana only for a number of years, but possibly 2 or 3 times a day, are they able to just say to you, that's it, I'm going to stop?
I guess they could. The fact of the matter is, can they? So this is not the issue is they can stop. They can. They just stop putting it in their mouths. They tell themselves they aren't going to. The issue is they can't stay stopped. Over a period of time, the emotions get too much. The sadness gets too much. And they will come up with any excuse to smoke another joint. And if that is true, if your loved one can stop, but they can't stay stopped, they have the illness. If they can stop and stay stopped, then perhaps they're in the wrong place. I agree. But keep in mind, if they stop and not turn to anything else, it doesn't count if they stop marijuana, but now they're taking sleeping pills to cope. Stop everything and stay stopped. And stay stopped for the rest of their lives. I think a very important thing you brought up there was quantity. What if it's 2 joints? But they only smoke like every 3-4 days. They don't smoke all the time. They only have 2 or 3 drinks. They don't drink in the morning. They're not pouring whiskey in their cups in the morning. They're not drinking bottles and bottles. They just did a smidgen of Coke every now and again. The quantity doesn't matter. Look at the allergy that results as a result of putting a smidgen in the body. 1 sip demands another, and it might be tonight and tomorrow. Skip a day, Friday, Saturday. They might binge Friday and Saturday, stop, but by Thursday, they can't stay stopped. They have to start again. And that's how we know that they have the illness. It's not about quantity. It's not about how long they've been drinking or using for. It's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with how their body reacts to it. Do they have the allergic reaction to it? And that is primarily seen by, can you stay stopped? And if they can't stay stopped, then they're in the right place. They really are. And let's hope we caught it soon enough.
The question I often ask is, they often say to us, I can't be an addict because I'm aware, I talk about it, I'm honest about it. I'm not smoking that much. And I ask them, well, what happens when you try stop? And why are you still smoking? Because if you didn't like it and it wasn't having the desired effect, you wouldn't be using it. And if you're using it, there's a good chance that that allergy is developed. And, you know, a lot of people say, but I don't crave it, especially marijuana. You know, it's physically not possible to crave it. But if you're not able to stop, you probably don't give yourself enough time to crave it. And the minute you have the urge, you just smoke, and it carries on and on and on. So I agree with Shani completely. It's not about the amounts. It's about what it actually does to them.
And often they don't even realize they are. You know, it's I just can't do it anymore. I can't take it anymore. Like, my boss is just so inconsiderate. Or look at my husband. I mean, anyone in my position would drink. Anyone. It's like there's so many excuses that come with it. You know, they don't see that they are preoccupied with escape, suppression, and avoidance. Preoccupied with getting away from their feelings, pushing their feelings down, pretending they're not there, and they only know one way to do that. They're not going to sit there and say, I'm having a bad day, I feel like smoking. Definitely not. They'll say, I'm having a bad day, this one's an arsehole, I'm going to leave my job, I can't take it anymore, I don't know why I'm doing this anymore, it's your fault, everything's your fault. And when you see all of that, the symptoms of addiction, remember, the symptoms are dysfunctional behavior, insane behavior. Your boss fought with you and you're blaming me. Like, I don't understand what's going on here. That is a symptom that they are preoccupied with using. It's not going to come out the way we think it is. It's going to come out as a complete preoccupation. They need to get this and they need to get it now. And it's just about being aware of that. You know, they don't identify it as, oh my gosh, I'm obsessing about using. No, they don't see it that way. Remember, it's a disease of distorted perception. So it's very tricky. That's when they need to call their sponsors and go to a meeting. So someone who has recovered in this area can quite bluntly say, you are mad. You have lost it. You are not seeing straight. Walk in my shoes, follow my way, let me show you and bring you back into reality. That's what the 12 steps are for. Come, bring me back, you know? So in those moments, get to a meeting.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one. My son is very newly there, and he's starting with the first steps. How do we as parents support him the best to make the best of this journey that they are on? Because, I mean, we are investing in them and believing in them and do not want them to waste their lives. I mean, I've got so much hope for my son and you know, for the future. So how do we support them best while they're there? And in this time, we are not even allowed to speak to them. So please just tell me, how do I support my son the best?
I'd
Okay.
like to jump in first, please, Tia, if you don't mind. There you are. This is it. This is how to support them. You're here, you're learning, you're feeling, you're asking questions. This is the best support you could give. With regards to the other, you know, we can't speak to them. I know it is difficult, but us not letting you speak to their family is we helping you and them. They aren't well enough yet to have lots of communication without manipulating or without transferring their emotions. And the families come from a soft and loving place, and that confuses them. So the best help you can give him is learn, get support, stay with us, and time will eventually, it will help.
I wanted to say the best way is to get your own therapy, to get your own stuff sorted. Because where he is now, he is sorted and looked after. it is when he comes out that you need to start supporting. And by that time, you need to have all the ducks in a row to help you to support him.
Thank you for that. I did take that on, and I take responsibility for that. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Okay.
I just wanted to add something, if possible. I've completely forgot. So with the disease, I mentioned on one or two occasions that one of the important factors to consider is the associations with drinking and using. So the people, places, the things, the memories, the things, anything coming near it, near that neural pathway. And I think that speaks to how we can also support our loved ones. If I could share quickly, if you guys have the time, I just wanted to share a study that was done. They took 3 people, and they looked at the at food, water, and drugs in terms of craving. Obviously, 3 things necessary for survival, drugs being the new one. And what they did was they dehydrated a person for a week, obviously in a suitable environment, but dehydrated them, put them in a CT scanner, and they wanted to take images of his brain in terms of craving water. So while he was in there, they sprayed water on his toes and dripped water in the background and so forth. So for a week, dehydrates him, then obviously triggered a craving with the water. And the brain lit up the size of a baseball. They then did the same thing with someone and starved them. Obviously, they had fluids, but starved them for a week. Put them in the CT scanner, wafted burgers at them and chips and all sorts of lovely things, and triggered the craving for food. And they saw that the brain lit up the size of a basketball. What they did is they took an addict who has been clean for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, and a year. So 6 different occasions. And they put the addict in the CT machine, I think it's the CT machine, and said to him, all I want you to do is think about the first time you used. That's it. Nothing else. At 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, and a year, the scan lit up the size of a baseball field. In comparison, what that tells us is just the thought of using for the next year is that powerful, and it's not necessarily craving as in the body. I mean the obsession, the preoccupation with it. I don't want to confuse the two, I apologize. But it lit up the parts of the brain necessary for demanding it, the size of a baseball field. How do we keep our loved ones safe? One way is to have a dry home. Alcohol out the home, to not be exposed to it. If it's possible, that's one way. So, I mean, there are many things you can do, but just as an example of how powerful it is just to be exposed to it, those are different ways you can also look at it, is to minimize the amount of associations with it as possible. New friends, new places, new things, new hobbies, things like that.